Happening now, we want to welcome our viewers from North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good evening. My name is Jason Neiffer, joining you live from fabulous and below zero Missoula, Montana, where I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual public school located on the University of Montana campus. And joining me, as always, is Dr. Wes Fryer. Good evening, Dr. Fryer.
Good evening. I think it might actually be below freezing here, but we are, I'm sure, considerably warmer. I am Wes Fryer, the Director of Technology at Cassidy School, and I think I have probably, I don't know, I may have more Twitter IDs than you, but you're faster at rattling off, your where to find me at the end of the show. So I am excited to be here for our first show of 2017, and we will say that Eric Langhorst was able to join us for our final show last week, and due to a family emergency is not able to join, but he may be tuning in to join. He's one of our faithful listeners who's listened to every episode, so we should come up with some kind of a special digital prize for those people who have suffered through, hours of banter about. Maybe we sound like a broken record now talking about AI. People are like, AI, yeah, whatever. So where are you going to take us tonight to start, Jason?
Well, there are a lot of interesting things going on right now. You did mention at the top of our notes for tonight, and by the way, you can find our show notes at our website, edtechsr.com, where we post all the links from our stories each week. And so you can go back and see the archives or find out the source material we're using to help guide our discussion. But Wes does note that the major tech happening this week is the Consumer Electronics Show, which is happening in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. It hasn't actually started yet. It'll get started, I believe, tomorrow. But the pre-show, which is as big as the show itself, has already started. And so if you are an electronics junkie, if you are a technology junkie, if you are a ridiculously large television junkie, then this is a good week for you to keep an eye on the technology media. I have not kept that close of attention to it, partly because there's so much, and so much of what gets announced at CES is what some people refer to as vaporware or vapor hardware, that it exists in announcements only and never makes it to becoming an actual consumer product. But there has been a lot of buzz around 8K televisions, which is a television resolution that's double 4K television resolution, which is 4 times a 1080p or HD resolution, which is just ridiculously more sharp than the old 480p televisions that we had pre-digital revolution. And I guess I'm duty-bound to ask, for being a super nerd, I mean, I have a tiny 32-inch, it is a 1080p television, but I've never really seen the lure of the 4K TVs. Wes, is there a 4K TV in your home?
No, when we went ahead and finally got a flat screen a few years ago, we actually stayed with 720p instead of the 1080 because DVDs are 720 and we weren't subscribing to cable, and I didn't think over the air. I mean, we do have over the air 1080 that we can get now. So no, I think it's a little bit like 3D television. They're always trying to invent the next reason to throw away your TV. And I guess we are finally going to get rid of this massive Sony, CRT thing that we have in our bedroom, because when you look at how wonderfully small and light and comparably larger flat screen TVs are, that seems logical, and the fact that they don't support HDMI. But no, I don't think so. I want to ask you, because I had tweeted about it, because I remembered you did a pilgrimage to CES. What was that? Was that like 5 years ago? How long ago? And what are your big takeaways of the event? Compare a CES experience to, let's say, an ISTE or a NCCE.
That's a really great question. So I did, and I was trying to remember what year it was, and it's escaping me. It was more than 5, and it was less than 8 is what I came up with tonight. But I, just as an interested consumer / technology advocate, wanted to experience that particular situation, and I did. And I'm not a buyer, I'm not a technology journalist, I am just a lowly consumer. And so it wasn't necessarily aimed at me, but it is an extraordinary event. That reminds me of 2 things. First, everyone gets sick there, and I've heard a lot of journalists this week say that everyone gets what's referred to as the CES cold, which is massive numbers of people in confined spaces that are hit pretty hard for several days. And the second thing is that there is really every end of the electronic sphere there. Whether you're talking about mainstream companies like Samsung or Sony, or I was trying to think of a major PC maker. Lenovo, I believe, does a lot of time there. Apple notoriously skips this particular event, but almost every other major technology vendor is there. And then there are hundreds, maybe thousands of really small manufacturers that are trying to make a name for themselves by putting out their relatively creative products. It wasn't a show that I went to, but a year or two after I went, I do remember there was the year of the ebook reader, where the Kindle had finally kind of made a mainstream, and CES was featuring dozens of major players and probably hundreds of minor players that were selling everything from Cadillac e-readers, maybe roughly akin to the Voyage Amazon a Kindle e-reader today, to $10 next to the cash register sale e-readers that were probably good enough, to pick up for minor reading in a pinch. And that was an example of something that didn't really take off. The e-reader took off, mind you, but there is really no market outside of the Amazon Kindle e-reader. So it's always an extraordinary exercise in what if in regards to technology. And, you can oftentimes get a sense, maybe not what's going to happen this year, but what's going to happen 2 or 3 years down the road.
Yeah, I think there's also perhaps a tendency, and this can happen at ISTE as well, to really focus on the glitz, the glamour, the latest, the gadgets, versus the instructional learning and what we can actually do with this in the classroom. And I think, we both, anybody's watching this show or listening to this show, knows that we can go far afield with our excitement for the latest, tech gadgets and news. But I think it's very curious that Apple, hasn't ever attended. And, I was sad to see Macworld go.
Right.
But there's also a lot of wisdom in the decisions that Apple makes. So yeah, I'm interested, and I did pick up a few different articles about some things that are coming out. In fact, my Geek of the Week's not something I've ever seen in person. It's something I've just saw as a result of following the hashtag. But I will say that, just as we can virtually and vicariously experience a educational conference by following the hashtag, CES is in that boat as well. So I don't know. And being in Las Vegas, I mean, what could be a more, experience the the hype and the, I don't even know the words that you say for that. The spectacle.
Yeah, spectacle is actually the perfect word. And to put a finer point on the question you asked earlier, comparing it to like an ISTE or an NCCE, I've come to very appreciate vendor floors now that I have some purchase authority. Whereas as a classroom teacher, those conversations were, speculative at best when I was talking to a vendor. Now, I mean, when I go to a conference, oftentimes the key piece for me is having face-to-face sit-downs with the folks that I am engaged in business with, because I want to be able to both negotiate and look to the future and keep that relationship fresh, because that's important to, the ongoing process of adopting materials for my day job program. But it's, Wes, you're hitting the nail on the head when you say that the spectacle nature of the vendor floor can oftentimes overwhelm unnecessarily people that might otherwise be good stewards of those customer business relationships. Every year, there's at least a half dozen prominent names that go to ISTE and will tweet from the floor of the show, legitimately saying that, what is hyped this year probably doesn't have a lot of meaningful impact on EdTech, or why is it that we're in our 4th or 5th year of there being 17 smartboard clone manufacturers when, I've seen a lot of great use of smartboards, and I've seen a lot of smartboards with a ton of dust on them. And so why are we continuing to invest in these platforms, which I think are all important arguments we need to have. But the kind of boat show nature of, the vendor floor, requires the right mindset to get something meaningful out of it.
And I'd say that the value of different people serving as filters is tremendously beneficial, because just as the web is, overflowing with all kinds of news and information, and I was reading some things, perhaps, I don't know, whatever, over the holiday. I don't know if it was getting ready for the show, but the amount of information, I think it's actually in this book that was my Geek of the Week last week, the Raising the Floor book. It's sort of like the things that Ian Jukes would share at one of his sessions, or, somebody who's like really trying to get you to taste exponential change and growth. It's beyond our ability to process as linear beings, how much information is going there. So by looking at what the tech pundits and the folks who are seeing all of this, and then they're filtering it down to, these are the things to watch, sort of like the Horizon Report. If you follow the Horizon Report, we've talked about that on the show, looking at these, these key trends and things like that. But I guess there's also a value in it, though, about the direction of technology and the innovation and the creativity, and the spark of something new, right? Because that's always going to be something that's going to catch people's attention, perhaps catch their imagination, spark their curiosity and interest. And, from a student perspective, perhaps, especially as we see technology, appealing to broad sectors of society, not just some narrow, bunch of white male geeks, for instance, but, I think there's a lot of value in that, in identifying those kinds of innovations and amplifying them. And it'll always happen at CES, where there'll be somebody probably like with one small booth or something, but then, it ends up on the Today Show or whatever. And time will tell whether those things end up being home run hits. But I think that's a really cool thing that, the dream of the garage innovator, who rises to stardom, that there's a lot of tough reality in between having an idea and getting it to market and, becoming a one percenter. But it's a cool thing to see people come up with innovative ideas. And it certainly is the biggest amplification that we have of that right now with technology. So.
Right. And then there have been a number of preview articles have been posted, and there is a lot of talk around cell phones at CES. The other major conference/trade show that comes up in a couple months is the Mobile World Congress, which happens in Barcelona, Spain. Between CES and the Mobile World Congress, there is oftentimes a lot of releases between the major cell phone manufacturers. And of course, we're talking about Android phones, because participate in these kinds of electronic shows. But rumors of new offerings from HTC. Samsung is rumored to be releasing some mid-range phones. The Honor brand, which is a Chinese brand, unleash an American release of one of their popular phones. LG is supposed to release some phones, as is Sony. And then the major hardware manufacturers, when I mean hardware manufacturers, I mean laptops and desktops. Dell has apparently already announced their wildly popular XPS 13 super thin laptop, which is a beautiful piece of hardware. I will say, having helped some folks in my office purchase those machines, we haven't had the best of luck on quality control. In fact, we have two in our staff, and we've had to send both of them back for repairs in the first month of their existence. But the hardware itself is absolutely beautiful, and it's starting at, I think it's like $800. It's a very reasonable piece of Ultrabook that you can purchase. But apparently Dell will be releasing very soon a convertible version of that, which is a flip notebook that you can take that beautiful form factor and then fold it into the other direction to create a kind of a tent effect or a tablet effect. And then the other hardware manufacturer that I believe is releasing something there is Asus. Is going to release new products under their so-called Zen brand, which was one of the first really popular Ultrabooks that offer a really thin, light MacBook Air-like existence. And I'd be also curious to see if they're going to release some kind of genre-pushing hardware with Windows laptops. So I think these are all interesting things that could end up having impacts on schools.
There's a pretty big bet too there that Apple is not making that other manufacturers are making, and that is that touch is going to matter for the laptop.
Yep.
We see that with Microsoft and the Surface and having full-blown Windows, integrated within the Surface. And I know several people who have loved Mac and love their MacBooks, and they are absolute fervent Surface lovers. And I'm not convinced that I want to try that road, but it definitely catches your attention. All of us can suffer from baby duck syndrome. Yes, you can Google baby duck syndrome, and that's when we are imprinted with something at a young age or at certain stage of life. For instance, if we've grown up with interactive whiteboards being smart boards, that's what we think we need to use, and we're comfortable. And there's a fluency and a real value in being able to stick with a platform that and you don't have to relearn something new and have your productivity dip. But it catches your attention when somebody has really been passionately loving something and then they've actually changed. And with Android and is it the Yoga tablet? Is that Lenovo's version of it? And with Chromebooks.
Beautiful hardware.
Yeah, and with Chrome, with this merge that we talked about on the show last year, where a variety of different Chromebook models are in the not too distant future going to be able to have full access to the Google Play Store. And that is an innovation now. I think we can safely say that is huge and transformative, this idea of having an app store, not just going to download your updates, willy-nilly, but being able to get them pulled down, having a store that can have a little bit more control over the security issues, et cetera. So I think that is a significant put on our education lens for looking at this, looking at what happens at CES with the hybrid tablet laptops, and then seeing how in 2017 the Chromebook platform specifically plays out with this Google Play integration. I think that's going to be significant, whether that really changes things or I don't know. I'm not sure where that's going to go. But I will say we have got both an Apple Store and a Microsoft Store. And on a personal note, our headmaster, like our superintendent for our school, is an avid Windows Surface user, and our director of communications is as well. So we, on a campus of about 100 and probably 50 or 60 faculty and staff users, we've got 2 Surface Pro users, and I don't know. I don't want to talk myself into it, but if I hear more and more people I respect, and this is what Peggy asked in the chat, what I meant by people who are not on the vendor floor serving as filters, it's when somebody that you consider relatively objective, and I would say somebody who's not working, let's say, for Microsoft or for Apple or for a particular company, but they're vetting different kinds of technologies, and when they're saying this is a big deal, this matters, this, and especially when somebody says this has transformed my life, I pay attention to those things, and it's going to be really interesting to see if people have that kind of experience with some of these, I don't know what they're called, but the hybrid, tablet laptops.
Right. Well, and I will say, you mentioning the Chromebook for a moment. I have not played with a Chromebook yet that can run the Play Store. So I was very tempted in November, and I was very tempted in December, and I'm now very tempted in January to end up adopting one of the platforms that has that compatibility now. None of the
But that's not in a stable channel, though. Don't you have to go beta or develop dev channel to do that?
It depends. There are 3 Chromebooks now that of the 30 or 40, they're going to have the compatibility where it is the stable channel. You still have to turn it on, though, right? It's not like the mainstream yet. But the one that I've been tempted by is the Asus Chromebook Flip, which is a tiny 10-inch Chromebook. I've actually had it in my hand at a Best Buy before, right? Because it was one of the first to have it's still one of only like 3 or 4 that has the compatibility. I was going to buy it just for that because I was so interested in what the Play Store could do for the Chromebook, and decided not to pull the trigger. Well, now there is the Asus Chromebook Flip 2, which was leaked last week on a Best Buy website, and then as part of their CES announcements, Asus has announced what they're calling the Asus Flip C302, which is a huge mouthful of letters and numbers, and it's essentially a Flip 2, right? And it is it's a $500 Chromebook. They've made a number of changes to it. It's now 12 inches instead of 10 inches. It has 8 gigs of RAM. It has a 128 gigabyte hard drive, an SSD drive. It's got a full HD 1080p screen. It still has that flip form factor to it, so you can take it and flip it all the way around to turn it either into a tablet or the kind of the tent mode. And my hand gestures are not going very well here, but you get the idea for those of you that are viewing on the YouTube. But the bottom line is that I still think that's an amazingly compelling form factor. And now that they're putting some guts behind that and a fairly decent Intel chip backing that, as opposed to, I believe, it was an ARM chip in the Flip or the Chrome Flip 1, that's a compelling piece of hardware. And I could see a school, maybe wanting to go in that direction, because that might last 4 or 5 years. I sometimes feel sorry for some of the schools that were super early Chromebook adopters when the hardware was very, very sad and meek, that kind of went all in on that platform, expecting that the platform to last 4 or 5 years per purchase, when that's not really that realistic for an ARM-based Chromebook. We purchased an ARM-based Chromebook for testing purchases at the Digital Academy. It's great. If you have one window up, it slows down to a crawl. If you have two windows up, especially if that other one. One sec.
No, it's all right. Yeah.
Different substance. And those older, slower Chromebooks, I think have a limited shelf life to them. Whereas nice implementations, more expensive, right? $500 is definitely not $129, but that's a compelling piece of hardware. So I'll be looking forward to that starting to go on sale in a month or two, and that might tempt me to go in that direction.
And that's a critical piece for schools as well. We're looking at refreshes, and I'm hopeful, and if anyone from our school is listening, this isn't, again, decided, but are contemplating inviting some teachers to be in a pilot project where they have a Chromebook and a less expensive iPad. But thinking about longevity, our return on investment on our MacBooks is phenomenal.
Yeah.
The 2012 pre-Retina MacBook Pros, which have a built-in DVD, that has been the workhorse of our faculty. And we can get, if it's in good shape, $400 today for those laptops.
Yep.
And that's in perfect shape. And we definitely have some that aren't. But when we think about longevity and return on investment and refresh and budget and all of those kind of things, that what you just said right there, just my ears, perked up, because as a tech director, thinking about our budget and if we can do a 5-year refresh, I don't know that I can do a 5-year refresh on a Chromebook today, like I could confidently do with a MacBook Pro. So that's an important issue for schools. And we've talked before about, the flattening out as far as laptop performance and how much more do you need. And, Ben Wilkoff is here with us. Welcome, Ben. And Ben is the one person I've communicated with so far who absolutely loves the new touch tab or whatever, MacBook Pro. What is that called?
The touch bar. Yeah.
A touch bar MacBook Pro. So anyway, I don't know. Implications. We have our personal devices that we'll experiment with and do, but we don't have the luxury of buying new machines for teachers every other year. So those kinds of issues are important when it comes to how long you're going to be able to keep it and what kind of life you're going to be able to breathe into it.
Absolutely. Okay, Wes, take us to our next story.
Okay, well, I put a couple actual quotes from Twitter in there in the show notes, edtechsr.com/links. The first one was the number of robots working in Amazon warehouses. And pretty interesting as we think about AI. So 2013, and this is like, 1,000, then we go 15,000. This is actually a good talk about linear and exponential growth, because 2014 was 15,000 robots, 2015, 30,000 robots. What do we call that? Well, you would have to see a little bit more, but it could be linear, increasing by 15,000, or it could be exponential, doubling. And you might have thought doubling. Well, it's actually linear at this point, because 2016 was 45,000 robots. But I've been doing a lot of reading about AI, automation, the replacement of jobs, the idea that a basic income or a universal basic income is going to be something that we're going to need to probably face and talk about. And interestingly, and I don't know that we want to digress to this, but there's a whole political side of this, of how much front and center do you want the role of the government to be in your life? And if the government is the one doling out a universal basic income for every citizen, anyway, there's probably a lot of libertarians that would have some problems with that. So that statistic was from John Ehrlichman and it was tagged CES 2017. And then the other one was talking about revenue from companies. And I think this is kind of an eye-opener because I'm surprised that Facebook is not higher on the list. So this is 2016 forecasted revenues. Top of the list, Apple, 217 billion. Second, Amazon, 137 billion. Third, Microsoft at 92 billion. So let's not count out, the boys in Redmond and girls and women. Sorry, I'm going to be shot by a feminist right now. And then Google, 89 billion, and Facebook, 27 billion. So, Facebook caught so much heat, as did, Twitter, but especially Facebook, for fake news and power and, how much, anyway, that they command in the economy. But those are really the big five. And from a school perspective, I think we can be pretty confident these companies are going to be around for a while. They are all fighting to become our artificial intelligence presence. For us to buy, as we talked about last week on the show, the Alexa or the Dot, which Eric Langhorst said they had picked up. You've got the Google Home. We now have, and there's an article in here, Mattel's $300 Echo clone will read your children bedtime stories. And that's from The Verge on January 3rd. Mattel, I think, got some flack for these Barbies that, people showed could readily be hacked, and the microphone turned on all the time so people could listen to your children. I mean, has anybody ever really had that happen? Has any child ever been, had their Barbie actually hacked? I mean, we have proof of concept things, and then we have things that are actually out in the wild happening. But this idea of being able to dialogue back and forth, and the march of AI, the hashtag that really caught my attention as I was getting ready for the show is voice first. And I think I mentioned last week that one of my biggest changes in the last year was how often I talk to my phone. There's an article from, this is from one of our, not Gartner. Yeah, Gartner says by 2019, 20% of user interactions with smartphones will take place via the virtual personal assistant. So anyway, it's been a big shift. I know we're on the early adopter side of things as far as using voice input, but I personally am very energized and excited about the potential to have an interactive dialogue rather than a give me this fact, do this one thing, which is sort of where we are today with voice recognition and the personal assistants.
Yep. And I guess I'd be duty bound to make my weekly demonstration of Google Home, and I'm going to try something I've never tried before. Hey, Google, who is Wes Fryer?
Sorry, I don't know how to help with that.
See, that's okay. If it had given us our street address and phone number, then we'd all be pretty scared.
And yeah, and I got to say, having read a little more lately on what it can do, it's on the verge of something amazing. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from in regards to those pieces. And to be honest, I mean, I don't envy your position, Wes. Trying to buy for the future when the future seems really unknowable right now, like even more than it's been in the past, right? Like, I think if I were a tech director, I probably would make a mix of tablets and Chromebooks would be probably my strategy. But, for all we know, Microsoft could resurge and start creating more compelling platforms. A lot of people do believe the Surface to be that. I know a lot of schools have gone all in on Surfaces and da-da-da-da-da. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting time right now to try to take a district dollar or school dollar and stretch it, the amount of time we need to make it do so.
So what do you make of the prices and the valuations? If you had a couple $1,000s of stock money to invest right now and you looked at those 5 companies, would you have a strong opinion one way or the other on where you're going to place your bets?
Well, I think part of it would have to be Google because they're ignoring their hardware. It seems like they've got their fingers in other pots other than hardware sales. I think Facebook is going to continue to become more and more relevant. And honestly, if Facebook was due to burn out, it would have burned out a long time ago. In fact, they've had staying power that they have, even through some missteps with data. I think they're a worthy competitor on that list, and I guess I'm a little short on Apple / Microsoft, and maybe to a lesser extent Amazon, from a hardware standpoint, because it feels like that. Obviously Apple will continue to make smartphones, and they figured out a way to make them very profitable, but hardware is not flipping as much as it used to. I think people are holding on to stuff longer than they used to. It's not as exciting as it used to be, because I think hardware we haven't certainly exceeded the innovation of hardware, but it's harder to come up with interesting things to do with that stuff now. And I think the software is really where it's at.
Ben Wilkoff has just put into the chat that he visited with a friend last weekend who programmed his own Google HomeBot to list off beers at the local brewery or look up articles on Wikipedia. So that being able to take some agency, do some coding, interact with the AI. I was going to write a blog post my last day of the holiday yesterday, and I didn't do it, but I set up basically an information bot on the issue of UBI. And it's not that technical, but basically I used 3 different things. I used Twitter, I used Pocket, and I used if this, then that. And so it grabs the tweets that are either saying hashtag basic income or hashtag UBI, and it puts them into Pocket. And it also looks at Google News, and I think I said basic income, and it gets that phrase. And then if this, then that, will periodically grab those articles from Pocket and post them over to Twitter. And the Twitter channel, if you want to check it out, is just UBI News. I think being able to program bots to do our bidding, whether that's to do our research, to gather articles, to find out what beers are on local tap and where I should go, or that's obviously not going to be something for our young students, but that is what I'm going to be really excited about. And with our STEM club and kids that are involved in programming, I'm tempted, actually, Jason, I don't know what you think about this, to maybe buy a Google Home or an Alexa or a Dot, to provide that, like, to our high school STEM club. Or if, what Ben is just talking about, if there's a way with code, because they're like writing Python scripts, and, they're beyond me. In fact, there's a Python script, I don't know Python, that somebody's written that will eliminate duplicates, because one of the problems with my bot was that it would have multiple articles, and I need a way to cull those out. I don't know. I think that inviting students to experience what's happening here on the edge of technology innovation is a good thing. And as they have potential to write code and programs and to imagine, well, what could this do? To me, that's exciting. And there's definitely educational implications and benefits to that.
Absolutely. And, I'm glad to hear you talking about, intelligent personal assistants having that much more interaction with the world. As you know, I have some interest in this particular topic, and I also think that having students understand that before it becomes a real reality will be a new thing. Actually, I don't think kids really understood the mobile revolution before the mobile revolution happened. In fact, I don't think kids understood the desktop revolution before that happened, or the internet revolution. Yeah. Whereas it does feel like these emerging technologies, which again are more software based, but I think that's the nature of where we're at in 2017. There is a chance we could have students become more cognizant of those pieces.
Yeah. And again, Pachai in October has 4 eras: the era of the PC, the era of the internet, the era of the smartphone, and the era of AI. And we are at the gate. We are at the door of the era of AI to be every bit as disruptive and transformative as those previous 3 eras were, and perhaps more, when we have access to that. I mean, just think about, and there's folks that are further ahead about this, but you think about how much research medically is coming out. We spent quite a bit of a time with our parents, and praise the Lord, we're blessed that both Charlie's parents and my parents are still with us. They're still alive. But drug interactions are a huge thing for the elderly. And being able to not only keep track of new research, but also, the specific impact of those for your medical condition and the drugs that you are taking and how they can interact, oh my gosh, it really is like Iron Man. I mean, it's thinking about putting on this incredible cognitive suit of power and being able to grasp in. But again, it comes down to algorithms. So I know everybody's not going to be a programmer, but talking about this energizes me. One of the things I've found, and this fuels me as a teacher, is being able to work with students, particularly in a club format or an after-school format, and talk about these ideas and then have a chance to play with some of them. That's a real energizing thing. And so I don't think this is going to revolutionize the curriculum. I don't think somebody is going to be able to put, Alexa straight into your computer science 101 class, but there certainly are ways that we can be talking about ethics within all of this. And I had told our academic director that if we go to a schedule where we have an intersession, which there's a number of independent schools that do that now, so kids can take just interesting or fun classes that aren't necessarily a core. I'd love to do one on STEM ethics, because I think there's a lot of things that belong in that, and then there's just also stuff that we're going to see this thing develop before our very eyes. We're not going to wait 20 years to see the impact of AI inside our homes. This is happening right now. So
absolutely.
Hey, Jason, did you see there was a Kim Commando article about Excel files opening the door for hackers to steal bank details?
I've not seen that. That's interesting.
My mother is a huge Kim Commando fan. So, and she sends me articles regularly. Peggy had put that in. So it's happening through the WhatsApp. That's another literacy issue as far as, authorizations and what we say yes to. We've talked about that on the show when, Pokemon Go, right, came out. Originally, when you logged in with your Google credentials, you handed them the entire keys to the kingdom of your. Am I remembering that right? I'm pretty sure that was.
That was
Pokemon Go. That it was a glitch that they should have known. Like, you don't have to give read-write access to your entire Google Drive, to play this virtual reality game. But people are probably. Just as normal needs to be shifted with password management and people using password managers and using a different password, yes, on every single different website, normal needs to be shifted as far as people's awareness of what a big deal it can be when you click, yes, I authorize this for this app, because, and some of those things are quizzes, right? Hey, find out what, house you'd be sorted in if you were going to Hogwarts. Well, you may have just opened up access for somebody to, get the data off your device. So I think those kinds of issues are pretty big. We got fake news issues, but there's all kinds of ways people are going to continue to try to scam and take advantage of us. Okay, Jason, would you be willing to talk about that technology and families article? That was one that I didn't read, the Recode, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that was really interesting. So there was a really interesting article in Recode, I think it was today, and the article, which is by Jan Dawson, says that we need more apps and devices designed to help families connect to one another. And Jan argues that he feels as though technology can be very isolating, and that technology could be doing a much better job family members and maybe even more broadly groups of people together to share thoughts and pieces. He mentions a set full of good examples. Netflix user profiles, which is something that my wife and I do use as very different Netflix users. The idea is that the technology has an acknowledgement that you have multiple people in your family and that they may not want to watch or be guided by the algorithm that the adults might trick off, or for that matter, the kids. Apple's family sharing functionality was the second thing he mentioned as an exemplary strategy. The idea that you could have apps that are family purchased, but also that there's a sense of parental control that dominates the setup of those pieces. And then Picnic, which is something I hadn't heard of before, but I think it's like almost like a project management system for families would be the way I describe it, right? Like it allows you to share calendars, meal plans, grocery lists, that sort of thing with one another. And in fact, there's a really excellent picture in the article of what that looks like on an iPad. And I'll admit it was compelling to me. It's not an app I'm in the market for. My wife and I, it's just the two of us. Our pets do not communicate with us via smartphones, and we find a joint to-do list actually to be more than enough. But I thought it was a really important point that there is probably not enough development around how do we create functional platforms for families to work together as opposed to just kind of creating their own world that they're stuck in.
I definitely agree and have a lot of interest in that. I know my sister, and I'm not going to be able to pull the name of this app out, but there was something similar to Seesaw, which we see a lot of classrooms using now for digital portfolios. But it was just the idea of parents archiving the work of their kids and being able to share it with grandparents and other members of the family, real readily. I'll find that that app and put it in, because that is one that's available now, and it's pretty cool, and it's all private sharing that you're doing within your family, but it's set up for families. Also, are you familiar with the Nextdoor app? Is that big in Montana, or have you heard of that, Jason?
It's not big in Montana, but I get like snail mail advertising on Nextdoor pretty frequently, actually.
Okay. Well, Nextdoor is an app set up for your neighborhood, and it allows you to invite people, either if you have their email, or you can print out these cards that you put on their doorstep or in their mailbox or hand to them. That'd probably be the best way. And then they join. And you can decide how much to disclose as far as where you live and who you disclose it to. My parents up in Kansas had used it several years ago, and it can be handy for getting rid of stuff or garage sale, or we just actually joined ours, which is huge in our neighborhood in the last 2 months. But we had a heater go out and ended up taking a look at recommendations that people had found this great guy in the local area, and he fixed our heater, So it's a thing that leverages the word of mouth that would be more powerful if we were gathering face to face for, PTA events or, a block party on the 4th of July. But anyway, it leverages that for neighborhoods. So I agree, and would love to see more apps that would do that, because we've been using the family sharing now for quite a while, and it's been a great way for us to be aware of just the apps and the songs that our kids are downloading, and gives us an opportunity to be that gatekeeper. Not that they're making bad choices, but there have been a few explicit songs that we've talked about, and it's been really good. So I'd love to see Apple, specifically, since that's the platform of our family with our phones, innovate in that space. But of course, it's also neat to see something that's going to be cross-platform and depending on whatever device you have, bring it, it'll work.
Well, and then the other piece of this that these apps could also probably really make a big impact on is that I just don't think there's enough great tools available for non-tech savvy parents, right? Like, technology is a serious tool that requires your attention and your thoughtfulness. And if you're not able to, figure out how to shut down the internet for your kids at night, if it gets to be a problem, or if you're not, I think some of the parent control apps maybe go a touch farther than I would as a parent, but that doesn't mean I don't want parents to have the opportunity to, crank things down or monitor what's going on, or and some parents feel very comfortable, having the kid hand over their phone, and I know your code and I can see what's going on in your phone, where others would feel intimidated by that. And putting more tools in their hands, I think, helps this generation of parents deal with what I'm sure is an incredibly intimidating and a very evolving situation related to your kids and this amazing world that, for better or for worse, they now have access to.
And I heard somebody express this with our digital citizenship discussions this last semester. But we hand the same smartphone with the same capabilities, to the 12-year-old or whatever, that we're handing to the full-grown adult. And we're not fully appreciating, and I'm saying this as I realize I'm indicted on this, how powerful the interactive psychology of these devices is. It is addictive. I needed to go to bed earlier last night, and I was spending more time than I needed to looking at articles about CES and Twitter and those kind of things. And so I definitely think that helping students and then helping ourselves focus on mindfulness, on self-discipline. I at one time had registered the domain digitaldiscipline.net. I have no idea who owns it. Don't hold me responsible because I gave it up and I don't even know what somebody's doing with it. But that is an enduring idea that I think we haven't paid as much attention to in schools as we need to. And the Note to Self podcast, I'm excited about their new project that they're doing. And anyway, it's a reason why podcasts and the chance to have people be our filters and then to be filters for others, it's an important element in this whole landscape. And trusted voices, right? Who do you trust? It's not, as Eric Langhorst said in our last session, it's not just the major news networks. People are going to all different kinds of sources. So I heard, I didn't put this into the show notes, but there was a journalist who, and maybe people tweet this all the time, that was like, I'm quitting Twitter. Twitter's worthless. And I think that it just depends on who you follow, right? The astronauts I follow that are tweeting from the International Space Station are certainly not tweeting garbage. It's amazing, but it's a matter of what channels I think you're going to hone in on, and then being able to filter. I'm going to help my wife this year, I think, work with lists on Twitter and following lists on Flipboard, because again, those are good information literacy skills to filter your feed and to say, I'm interested in now, learning about this, or really honing in on people who are sharing about this particular topic. So what else would you like to talk about from our list of links?
This is an interesting story. CNN reports that French workers now have the right to ignore their business emails outside of the workday, which would include evening hours and weekend hours. And I'm always reminded of stories that came to light after Steve Jobs died, about how notorious he and his upper staff were about being ruthless about kind of 24-hour access to their employees. And I can't remember which. I want to say it was Scott Forstall, or it was one of the upper Apple people. Everyone knew that from 8 to 9 o'clock on Sundays that you could have an hour off, because that was The Sopranos. And apparently he was notorious for watching The Sopranos every week, so you got an hour off. An hour off every week. But man, at 9 o'clock, be prepared for emails, because apparently the emails were 24 hours a day and you're expected to kind of keep track of them. And, and I got to say, I'm not the model of this, because especially early on in my organization's existence, I was mind the 18 hours of email a day, partially because, if I didn't answer them, we didn't have the staffing to do so, where things have changed pretty dramatically now that we're in year 7 of our program. But oh my Lord, is that extraordinary and a really big deal that has occurred. So, interesting stuff. And, the French have always have had protective labor laws. There's, very critical vacation laws there, protections for work week hours and overtime protections in France. But it's just really interesting that there's a recognized right there to ignore your email on weekends. So I guess, Wes, first, how's your evening email engagement? And second, should we be considering something like this for the United States?
I think also looking at the growth rate of the French economy and other issues that they've got with labor and employment, I don't know that they're necessarily the model that we want to look at. But of course, you have better perspective on that, having just come back from there. So I don't know how much that changed your perspectives on it. I think it's not something that needs to be regulated, but I definitely think it's something that we need to be aware of and that leaders need to talk about and address. I'll have to be careful here, because I am not, how much I disclose, because I am not a model of email inbox zero perfection. I have worked with people who are, and I admire those people, and I am still working on that. But it's something that we all need to be aware of our boundaries. And this goes back to a book I've probably mentioned before, one of the best books I've read in the last few years, called Essentialism. And part of what that talks about is knowing your boundaries and being able to say no. And this fits in with email, and because as soon as you, reply, as soon as you give out that phone number for texting, you open up the door. and people have very different ideas about what boundaries are appropriate and not appropriate. And I'll tell this story, and a credit to, I won't reveal which one, but one of our librarians, I had forgotten this last summer that she was on vacation with her family on the beach. And so I had emailed something to her, and she, in a respectful way, basically replied and said, sorry, and it wasn't an auto response, but, it's just, we need to be respectful of people's time. It's not healthy for us to be working 24/7. The tools that we have been given allow us to work on work far more than we probably should to be healthy. So did your perspectives on labor laws and this kind of a question change at all as a result of your recent trip to France, Jason?
I would say it hasn't, although I do think they're onto something in regards to, we need to find a way to create balance in regards to digital devices. I mean, this wouldn't have been a reality 30 years ago because there was no way for, the boss's email to wiggle its way into your home at 3:00 in the morning, whereas now there is. But, I think one of the things we also have to consider, and I laugh every week, Wes, because it feels like you and I are both radicalizing every week regarding the future labor problems because of tech. But one of the things I think is probably also true is that work weeks probably don't need to be 40 hours in a world where we just don't have enough jobs for people, right?
Right.
And so, 30-hour work weeks, 28-hour work weeks is probably not that far from unrealistic in a world where we have, millions more people than we do have jobs to fill them. So maybe one of the ways to do that is to say that, you need to make sure that your existence outside of work is not carrying the cloud of work with you.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to take us to an article that'll change this a little bit to talk about genomics. Genomics is one of those topics that Alec Ross wrote about in his book, Industries of the Future. And over the holiday, I was aspiring to write more than this, but I did write 2 book reviews about really important books I read the last year. And one of those was Industries of the Future. This is an article from December 21st, 2016 in a website I have never heard of before called Food Dive. So I don't know whether that's credible or not, but it's by Sasan Amini, and it's how CRISPR is changing the food industry. And CRISPR is a tool which allows folks to go into DNA and basically snip out pieces that are not wanted. And this is mainly talking about food, but this isn't just food. This has impacts for every organism that has DNA. And the fact that, let me just read a little bit about this. CRISPR is one of the fastest, most precise, and impactful methods for genetic engineering the world's ever seen. Monsanto recently acquired a commercial license, making it the first license for agricultural use. DuPont's been working with Caribou Biosciences for more than a year and is already growing CRISPR-edited corn and wheat plants in field trials. Scientists have been using it on plants and animals to include mushrooms that don't brown as quickly in the refrigerator, drought-tolerant corn, and virus-resistant pigs. And one of the things that you'll find later in the article is that the U.S. government has decided it's not going to regulate this in the food industry the way that it does the actual genetic hybrids, because they're not putting things together. They're just snipping, DNA out. And, oh my gosh, this is huge. From an educational standpoint, helping students know what CRISPR is and talk about it. Again, this would fit into a great curiosity link that you might share with students. This would be a great writing prompt, right? What kinds of dystopian novels could you write off of this article, thinking about some kind of DNA that's going to be snipped and changed, and then what comes of it? But of course, science fiction is reality today. CRISPR is for sale commercially. And so I really think I'm going to be teaching a STEM ethics class at some point in my future, because we may be radicalizing ourselves with talks of labor and politics. But, when it comes, ethics is so important, right? Character education. This is a huge thing, no matter what your philosophic or spiritual background is, right? Helping people learn to care for each other and to make good choices. Like, this is an essential thing that schools, as social organizations, do inside, countries and just as entities. And so these topics are really coming home, because what are you going to choose to eat? Are you going to read your food labels? And are you willing to take the risk of unintended consequences? There's tremendous positive potential here in terms of feeding the world. And I think we already live in a world of food abundance. It's that we've got distribution issues and politics and other things that intervene for us not, feeding the whole world. But I find this to be a mind-blowing article that I can only barely start, I guess, scratching the surface of what the implications are. So have you heard of CRISPR before, and what are your reactions to this, Jason?
Nope, that's new to me, and it is very interesting because it is, again, radicalized podcast hosts as we go along. But there are going to be 10 billion people on Earth at some point, and we don't.
But are demographics stabilizing? Because that was something we watched at the Dollar Movie, the new Tom Hanks. It was the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
and that's
about.
not a great film. It's a good dollar movie, but but their thesis was, we're going to overpopulate and reach 20 billion. Isn't the world's population leveling out at some point?
A good question. Well, and I think part of that is because we are going to hit we're going to hit a point where there's diminishing increases because of resources, and I don't remember. We're at 7.5 billion right now, and we're adding at 80 per year is the current rate. I think it's going to it's going to increase, but at some point it's just going to be less. The rate of increase is going to decrease. So yes, is the answer to that. But we have a increasing population, and ignoring the resource tensions because of the diversity of energy usage in the developing world versus the developed world, and ignoring all those debates for a second. Food is a critical piece of this. And at the same time, there is a trend in Western countries to move away from factory produced food more towards localized food, and those tensions there's actually quite a bit of tension between those movements, because not that we need factory farming and factory food production to feed the world, but it does add some efficiencies to the process. And so when I hear you talking in regards to that, I will definitely consume this article in a bit more of a detailed way. Those are the kind of things I think about, because I do think that these things are going to come to a head, probably not in our lifetimes, but relatively soon.
It's going to be soon. This is an example of where reading a word or a vocabulary and causing yourself to be sort of sensitized to it, and then you recognize it. That happened to me because CRISPR was mentioned in this Industries of the Future. And so as I was scanning through again, it may have been CES articles or whatever, it really jumped out at me, because genomics is one of the 3 main industries of the future that he identifies. So if you're doing some counseling for your own children or grandchildren, trying to help folks think about chemistry, biology, the cross of technology with the biological sciences, genomics, it's really big stuff. And I think that we're not ready, right? The amount of change that is just happening, right around us. It's all around us. It's happening, but we don't necessarily, view it with perhaps the lenses that we'll be able to, in 10 or 20 years. So you've got some other great articles that you put in there, and I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. Maybe we're there, but anything else you want to talk about, from AI takeover to the Trump effect from Mossberg? Or
I would just maybe mention the Mossberg article. If nothing else, then maybe listeners would be interested in reading the article. Walt Mossberg is the former Wall Street Journal writer that now is the editor of Recode, and tends to be more or less an Apple-focused journalist. But he writes, interestingly enough, that there's a lot of hand-wringing going on right now because there is a perception that the technology industry in the United States will be significantly impacted by the Trump administration. It's just that no one can really get a handle on how. We've talked after the election that net neutrality could be an issue. Obviously, the labor question is an issue as there's obviously a movement towards U.S. companies bringing manufacturing jobs back on U.S. soil, or at least not shipping those jobs out. It was Steve Jobs that famously told Barack Obama that the Apple jobs that have left the United States are gone and we should stop focusing on them. I don't know what that debate would look like in 2017 under a Trump presidency, but I do think that, we need to keep an eye on how this plays out. Obviously, Trump is one branch of government. Congress has been trying for years to either protect net neutrality or simply get rid of it. So those types of issues will be important and do impact ultimately educational technology.
I'm going to do one other article shout out and then let's do Geeks of the Week. This was one that I found through one of the other articles for CES. It's from New Scientist on November the 21st. Google's DeepMind AI can lip read TV shows better than a pro. There was an article I think we included in the show notes about Berkeley and OER and how they were looking at dumping OER because it was going to be so costly to make these videos and media resources accessible for 504, right? Because as a public institution, they've got obligations to cater to folks who are visually or hearing impaired in terms of being able to get that content. Which that'd be a tragedy, right? All this free content that they're giving away and saying, "Oh, sorry, we can't pay to have this, subtitled, so we're going to have to do away with it." That kind of development of AI is both exciting and scary. And the article actually says they didn't think this was coming to a security camera near you, but it could, right? I mean, the capability of AI, if you're in front of a camera and it's got a clear shot, I mean, being able to lip read, that's interesting from a security standpoint. From an educational standpoint, it's also exciting to think about, foreign language films and this dream, sort of like the anti-Tower of Babel, the universal translator. Did you, by the way, use translation apps when you were in France?
I did, and the one that it was particularly useful for me was the Google Translate has, and I can't remember what the app that they purchased that allows you to put the camera up to words and it auto translates on the screen.
WordLens, or was it something else?
WordLens. Yeah. It's the remnants of WordLens have been sucked into Google Translate, and it's fabulous. Like it really is an amazing thing. And that, I don't have much French. I don't have. Well, I guess I have a lot of English, so that wouldn't matter in London. But the bottom line is that I want to be able to just order on a menu or ask if they know English, and the app was pretty amazing to do that.
Yep. All right. Well, should we do Geeks of the Week?
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, mine is a hover camera. There was actually somebody at work today who had asked me about, do you know about this iPhone, hovercraft? The Twitter, he wasn't talking about this one. There's a different one. And I'm not sure I want to put my multi, $100 iPhone just up with the low level of drone flying skills that I have. I don't think that would be a very intelligent thing to do. But the hover camera, which is the Twitter handle is hover camera. It's gethover.com. It's sort of like the ultimate selfie stick, because you go ahead and let it fly, and then it follows you. And if you watch the video on their website, this guy's like jumping off a cliff, and actually the hovercraft doesn't follow him all the way into the surf. But they're also touring some cathedrals in Europe, and I'm sure we're going to start to have rules. They're going to say no weapons, no personal drone selfie assistants, to follow you and take pictures. So I've seen some stunning videos of drones. In fact, maybe I'll put this one in the show notes via, I guess it was the Hyper app, which I may have used as a Geek of the Week. It will show you kind of 5 amazing videos from the last day or just recently. An incredible drone video of Aleppo showing the damage. It wow. Looked like a I don't know, 8.0 earthquake or something, and you're just like, what is going on? And people live here. And so drones are exciting, but here we've got it coming to a personalized. I think it's like $600. So that's going to be outside the monthly disposable income of most of our listeners, I think, but it's kind of cool. So that's my geek of the week.
Awesome. Well, the one I'd like to share this week is a service I actually used in Europe, and I'm actually considering utilizing it for my parents' cell phones. TextNow is two things. It's an application that assigns you a free phone number and also allows you to make virtual calls via Wi-Fi on any cell phone or tablet. What's interesting about that is that when I was in Europe, I did utilize local SIM cards. So I had a UK mobile number for 5 days, and I had a France mobile number for 5 days, and I wanted to be able to text some friends and colleagues back in the United States. And so I downloaded TextNow. I created a free account. It's a lot of ads and stuff on there, but I was able to text back and forth to my US friends' numbers without issue. But what's really great about it is they also have a really amazing prepaid cell phone service where you can spend $13 a month and get unlimited text, unlimited phone calls, and only 100 megabytes of data. But after you use your 100 megabytes, it evolves to a unlimited 2G connection, which is not very fast, but will be serviceable in a lot of scenarios. And the reason why I mention this is because I'm considering moving actually to T-Mobile, which is now available in Montana. And Wes gives the big thumbs up to T-Mobile. And one of the things I want to do is go unlimited on the 4 phones in my account with family that would use it, and then take my parents, which between the two of them have used maybe a megabyte in a year of data, and put them on a TextNow account where we'd be paying $13 a month to get them that access. So very impressed with the service, textnow.com, and the text number and the app, which works on an iPad or a phone, is free. So I recommend that as a interesting way to get access to texting friends, even when you're not on a cell connection. So we're at the top of the hour, which means that we've made to another episode of the EdTech Situation Room. For all the links we talked tonight, you can go to our website, edtechsr.com, where you'll find links to all of our past shows, and also links to anything we talked about tonight. And plus, we usually have an interesting cadre of links that we never could get to in the hour-long format. So my name is Jason Neiffer. I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located at the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And I'm also the Tech Savvy Administrator in Residence for the Northwest Council for Computer Education. I blog at blog.ncc.org. I'm available on the Twitters at Tech Savvy Teach. And Wes, why don't you take us out?
I am Wes Fryer, and I have changed my Twitter profile to say I empower people to be who they are supposed to be and do what they are supposed to do. My favorite hashtags are Create to Learn with the number 2, DigCit for digital citizenship, and OklaEd, which is our educational hashtag in Oklahoma. And I have more Twitter channels than I will care to admit to you today, but I do have 3 of them that I have listed in addition to W. Fryer. You can find me at EdTech SR, where we'll keep you posted on our updated shows. The new information bot that I know everyone will want to subscribe to immediately, UBI News, and then my Eyes Right blog as well. My blog is on speedofcreativity.org, and we look forward to, hopefully, another exciting year of radicalizing ourselves and you here on the EdTech Situation Room as we look at the impacts of technology, not only on our society, but specifically within our schools and classrooms. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.